Well, welcome everybody to the last symposium of the year for the Honeybee Watch Symposia series. I'm Steve Rogenstein here in Berlin. I'm the project director of Honeybee Watch and today's host. And I'm joined by Rigo Moro, our science director, and three lovely guests that have us very excited to talk about citizen science. Today, we're going to be focused on this symposium. It's titled Spreading the Buzz, Communicating and Recruiting for Citizen Science. And we'll take a broad look at research projects that rely on people like yourself, concerned citizens, who in particular, in our case, love bees and want to help scientists better understand how these free-living honeybee populations are surviving via natural selection. And at first, through our three guests here, we're going to look at the big picture. So what is citizen science? Why do these research projects rely on citizens? When is the involvement of the public suitable for certain projects? Who gets involved? And how to find, recruit, and engage with participants. So most of our topics relate to bees specifically. However, there are a couple that are more about logistics of organizing a global study on bees. For instance, communicating and recruiting for citizen science was something that we thought would be very kind of pertinent to our audience. And we wanted to introduce our network to the ins and outs of how citizen science works. Again, hopefully inspiring some of you to get integrally involved and perhaps launch a study in your own country. If you are indeed motivated to start something locally, by all means, get in touch with us. Maybe we can introduce you to scientists in your area, to others who are interested in learning more about free-living bees, beekeeping associations, beekeepers, et cetera. We have our fingers all over the world, which is exciting and complex. But to back up just a little, citizen science projects like Honeybee Watch tap into the public's interest in and ability to contribute to research that we scientists cannot do alone. In our case, we rely on communities around the world to locate and monitor free-living nest sites, and over the course of years to understand their survival rates. And when we go and sample these colonies to better understand their genetics, their pest and pathogen loads, uniquely within their locations, as well as in comparison to adjacent managed apiaries. And this is actually part of the study of biodiversity that we'll be endeavoring for the next 3 years. But the question is, how and maybe where to start. If you have the idea of doing this, but don't really have the resources, you might feel stymied. So what we're hoping to do is, inform you of how you can involve citizens in your area, and especially how do you engage them over extended periods of time, because that's kind of the key to citizen science projects is not just attracting them, but retaining them. And how do you do that? So these are some of the issues that we've grappled with along our 4-year journey so far. And we thought that this symposium dedicated to the topic would be informative and inspirational, and that's how we got here. So we've assembled this troika of impressive guests, and what we really like is that their professional experiences complement one another, and their presentations will as well. And through the course of their 45 minutes, we're going to get a crash course on citizen science, peppered with some best practices. Just very quickly, there's a short little story that occurred that indirectly introduced us to all three of our guests. In February of 2020, I was invited to give a talk in Poland about 8 citizen science projects that represented a cross-section of nature-based and science-based research. And the idea was, through interviewing the directors and project managers of these different citizen science projects, we at Honeybee Watch, which at that point was just a concept, we would learn best practices, and we could incorporate what each of them had contributed to the conversation so that we didn't, repeat things. We didn't start from, scratch, but that we could actually incorporate their advice and make Honeybee Watch bigger, better, and smarter. Our next guest is Nathalie Steinhauer. She's in the United States, and she ran the now defunct Be Informed Partnership out of the University of Maryland. If I'm not mistaken, it was the largest and maybe longest running survey of honeybees in at least the United States, maybe even the world. And maybe you could talk about that, Nathalie. And it tracked annual mortality rates by surveying something like 5,000 beekeepers annually. We met in 2019 when I was researching the aforementioned presentation in Poland, and she was one of the citizen science projects that I had admired. It's a long story, but I actually participated in its pilot year in something like 2011. And she talked with me for a good hour or so and provided all sorts of information and best practices and advice for citizen science. Things that I remember in particular were involving a sociologist, for instance, if you were going to be using or creating surveys to decrease bias. Another thing was allowing flexibility in your survey to evolve, because at the onset, you're not going to get all the questions right for all the potential applications for it. And then the last thing is, it's very important to protect your participants' privacy. And that was kind of an idea that sparked the data rights and data sharing symposium last year. So today she's going to share some experiences, insights from her BEEP days, as well as hopefully share some new tips when you're overseeing a citizen science project. So Nathalie, I'm going to give you 14 minutes as well and a 1-minute notification.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Ready. Let's go.
Let's go.
Thank you, Steve. All right. So as Steve said, I am now the research associate with Oregon State University, but before last year, I was the research officer for the Be Informed Partnership since I graduated in 2017. So the Be Informed Partnership began its first project in 2007, though we officially established in 2011 through a USDA NIFA grant. And one of the objectives of the grant was to achieve sustainability, which by the end of the grant in 2014. And we actually marked that achievement by obtaining our nonprofit status at the time. After that, we operated for another 10 years, but unfortunately, we had to disband in late 2023 due to funding shortage. And so we added to the statistics that the average lifespan of nonprofit is around 10 years. So over the years, we developed a lot of programs. Steve talked about the loss and management survey, where we estimate mortality every year. But all of our programs really were centered on collaboration with participating citizen scientists, beekeepers. So as we heard from the previous talk, there's a lot of aspects to a citizen science program. But in this talk, we are going to try to dig a little deeper, specifically into the issues relating to the recruitment and the retention of participants over time. And first, there are some key aspects of the program development that are really going to impact recruitment. And so I wanted to start with the scientific question, because it is really a critical aspect, right? Your scientific question must be specific and measurable. So this question will drive every decision down the line. It will shape your data collection goal, analyze these processes, all of your evaluations, your measure of successes. And here is a potential pitfall. And so in this presentation, I'm illustrating the pitfalls with this cute banana peel. So the pitfall is not having a scientific question or confusing a general mission with a specific research question answerable with measurable data. So the mistake to avoid here is just collecting data and figuring it out later, or assuming that more data is better, that any data will do and we just need more of it and we'll figure it out. And that should not be the goal. What you should try to focus on is useful data for your specific goal, and really focus on unbiased, representative, specific data. And that can only happen if you're absolutely clear about the question that you're trying to answer before data collection. Now, if I had more time, I would talk about scope, geographic scale, and the importance to list your existing assets when you're starting and always have a wish list ready at all times. So if you want to talk about that, we can talk during the panel. Now, the second pitfall is to not have an established timeline at the beginning of your program development. So the common trap here is that, again, you're going to just collect data and then you will figure it out later, or you just want to wait until you have more data, right, or more locations or more replication, more years of data. And here is the reality check: is that if you don't dedicate time to processing and analyzing your data, that will always get pushed off, because we're all very busy and we're all constantly busy. Now, also, even preliminary data needs to be evaluated, right? We said it is critical to assess if the system that you build is adequate to fill your objective. And if it's not, then you have to, try to rectify it as early as possible and adapt it as needed. And you might have to adapt it, a lot, but it's always important to evaluate the data you get and see if it's going to be able to answer your question. No, also the last reason to not delay this is that results should be shared back with the participant as early as possible. As scientists, we take years to publish our results, and that's okay. But, your participants shouldn't wait to get the value out of their participation. So it is critical for participant retention and also project credibility. So you should really set time goals for those and set them as priorities and not afterthoughts. Okay, so at this point you have a goal, you have a scope, your timeline. So now you need your participants. And this is where, you can connect your scientific question and your broader mission and try to create your inspiring message. And here the key to driving motivation is really to try to make participation purposeful. So your participants need to really clearly understand how their data is going to make a difference and what impact their contribution will have. And the pitfall that you want to avoid here is that if you have a goal that is too vague, like we're helping science or we're monitoring wildlife, this might attract some participants, but it won't keep them engaged in the long term. The solution here is to be specific and make contribution tangible so that you are clear on how you're going to use that data concretely and share that with your participants. Now, it is often said that you need to know your audience and tailor your message. So let's take a minute and think about your audience. Who are they? Are they schools and teachers, nature groups, hikers, photographers, any other communities? You need to understand, understanding your audience will help you know where to recruit them, but also what message to use. And the idea is that you want to paint a picture of how your project will fit into their routines, answer their values, and speak to their motivation. So for example, our health monitoring program, one of our program was addresses towards small-scale beekeepers, and it was about giving them the know-how, the tools, and the confidence to do their own health assessments of their hives, backed by experts. And it did fit into their routines because beekeepers already inspect their hives, and it spoke to their values, which was keeping bees healthy. And the motivation here came from being proactive rather than reactive. And so really the project was about turning them into the sentinels of their own apiaries. So one thing to know is that different groups might resonate with your project for different reasons. And if that's the case, that's great. You should customize your message to each of them. So trying to think about what value will they get from participating, and how does your objective align with their interest and their needs. Now, one thing that I think is important is leveraging partnership. Obviously, collaboration are important. They will amplify your recruitment efforts because they will expand your reach, but they also might vouch for you, right? So that will give you more credibility. So we're talking here about local partners like schools, universities, NGOs, community groups. All of them can connect you to their existing networks. One question that comes is which channels should you use? And the answer is all of them, or as much as you can, given your time and energy. So the recommendation is really try to use a mix of platforms. So don't hesitate: social media, news outlet, podcast, workshops, community events. Use local newspaper, radio station. They can all offer free publicity. The more channel you use, the greater your reach, because also people will share and forward. And so you never know how your message will find the right audience. One thing is also try to find the community leaders, right? The influencers in your area. Try to find those people that can help you share your message in a peer-to-peer way, because people trust other people. Communication obviously is key to both recruitment and retention. And there is a lot of information out there about how to promote effectively and how to communicate effectively. So this could as easily be a 1-hour lecture on its own. But here's a few like essential. We talked about tailoring your message to your audience and relating your goal to their motivation in an inspiring message. But it's a tough balance because you also want to try to keep it short and focused. We are all have a limited attention span. So a general rule of thumb is to try to limit to one call to action per message. So for example, it's going to be one click, one link to click, one survey to take, one story to share. Try to have only one request per communication. Next step is whatever you ask of your participants, try to simplify it. The idea is to minimize all the hurdles, right? So make sign up easy and getting started simple. Try to remove all of the barriers. So use low cost or no cost option preferably. Try to use accessible platforms, minimal equipment needed to gather your data. Honestly, provide step-by-step instruction that will reduce confusion, and in return, you will have less emails and mail and calls for troubleshooting. So that makes your life easier as well. And here is another like potential caveat. It's important for you to respect your participants' time, right? So be honest about yourself and the data you want, and ask, are you going to allow for casual participation as well as more intensive involvement? Right? So given the investment in time and effort to sign up participants, train them, communicate with them, is a casual participant that is providing only one or few observations worth your investment? And if not, then can they do other things that can help instead of participating to the data collection? For example, in our Sentinel program, we were requiring our participants to provide monthly recordings over 6 months long. And so that proved to be too demanding for some of our participants. But that meant that we actually reduced the value of incomplete data sets that we got in return. So maybe they should have participated in other fashions. So the lesson learned here is that more participants isn't always better. Not every participant will equally contribute to achieving your goal. And if that's the case, then that should be clear at sign up, and maybe there are other ways that they can contribute. Finally, always pilot before a full rollout, right? So I wanted to just to push the idea that evaluation should always occur at every step of the process. So try to test your recruitment process, test the gathering of the data gathering process. That means that the messaging, the instruction, the platforms all should be tested with a small group. And then you can use their feedback to try to refine, identify the barriers, the confusion, the bugs, all of it before scaling up. Okay, I'm skipping point 3, which is training. So again, we can talk about that later in the panel if needed, to focus on retention. Because for most program, retention is the key to long-term success, right? Once you have recruited and trained participants, you want to keep them active as long as possible. The more you invest in them, the more costly their turnover becomes. But I wanted to point one note is that for some programs, if the goal is participant education, then some form of graduation might actually be desirable. And in this case, actually having an end date can motivate the participants to really stay engaged and make the most of their time in the program, rather than postponing their involvement without consequence. So either way, if it's long-term or short-term to graduation, you want active participation during that time. And that really hinges on value. Because as Caroline said, it really must be a two-way street, right? You're getting data, the participant need to see some personal value in their contribution too. It should not just be about helping science, they need to have personal value out of it. And there are different ways to provide value, and we're going to talk about some of them very quickly. But the key takeaway here is that people's time and energy is limited, so you are showing appreciation for their effort by ensuring that they gain something meaningful in return. So very practically, the first option is to offer a tangible service, right? So maybe it's a diagnostic or it's an actionable result, right? Which means a result that can give participants some meaningful information that they can act on or that can change a behavior. Or you can also offer benchmarking. So that means comparing your participants' data to their peers. So that can be regional trends or historical levels to provide perspective. And really, that was BIP's whole spiel. We collected disease prevalence data and we gave it to beekeepers anonymously so that they could compare to others in their area and to historical levels. And so we hope that that helped them proactively monitor colony health, catch problem early, and plan ahead. But the lesson learned for us is that this service was added value, but it was most often useful in the first year of participation of the beekeeper. So that really kind of led to a mismatch between our scientific objective and participants' gained value. So maybe a graduation model would actually have been beneficial for us. All right. And then, as I said, as soon as possible, because even though your publication will take time, the value that you give to your participants shouldn't take that long. And then finally, something a little more elusive, but honestly, Honeybee Watch is doing it very well. It's the creating a sense of community, right? And because that can be an added value too. And most effectively, you can do that by fostering social engagement, right? The idea is to create opportunities for participating, for participants to interact. They can share questions, they can connect over shared interest. Because the idea is that you created a network, therefore you can share that network with the participants, and that can be a value.
Just to let you know, you have a minute.
Okay, so I have only 2 more slides, which is one is building ownership, which means making your participants feel like owners of the program, because that makes them feel invested and strengthen their ties. And also, if it's done well, it really gives you valuable insights into their needs and capabilities. And practically, the way you do that is you involve them into decision making, right? Co-designing the project, give feedback, invite to pilot methods or tools, and you celebrate their contribution because recognition really goes a long way. And my final thoughts, sustainability, because that is what we all wish for. Sustainability is essential for continuing your work, but you should ask yourself, how long is long term? And stay focused on your goal to evaluate them regularly. And maybe they have changed and they should be, and you should evaluate that. If you're scaling up, ensure that your workload is manageable for your team because efforts and costs will scale up as well. And if you're seeking funding, maybe try to diversify funding sources. There are different options, right? Explore grants, corporate sponsorship, and crowdfunding, but each of them have their own limitation. So grants, they usually don't like repeated experiments. So having the same project over the years is something that grants avoid repeat funding. Corporate sponsorship, well, consider potential like strings attached or maybe public perception. And then crowdfunding, we all know how difficult it can be to rely on our personal networks. We never like to ask donation for our friends and family, so that's difficult too. So try to set clear rules about where will you ask donation from and under what condition. And finally, visibility is your friend at every stage of the process. You want to share your results, share the success stories widely, because that will maintain public interest, help you recruit new participants, keep your participant engaged, and potentially attract new funders. Okay, that is my talk.
That was great. You're hired. We should have had you at the beginning of Honeybee Watch, not just consulting to me on one of many projects, but this is really great, great information.
Thank you.
And I ask our 3 guests if we can share these presentations because Carolina, for instance, you had all the QR codes, and Nathalie, there's so much information here. It's really great.
Of course.
So thank you, Nathalie, for complementing what Carolina started. And now